took a shovel to the basement and you blistered up your hands. You danced all night at the wedding. You stayed up drinking with the band. You made love until the daylight was creeping across the floor. Tell me, what else was it you were looking for? Felt the first chill of November still right inside your coat, right there with the fragile pulse of living flooded in your throat. You left the house you thought you lived in, didn't even shut the door. Tell me, what else was it you were looking for? The book of all your precious sorrows had come down off your shelf, and so you labored over every empty page until you came back to yourself, and you laughed out loud. Oh, you were light and free and poor. Now tell me, what else was it? What else was it you were looking for? Meet me in the clear light, right there where the leaves are coming down. And if I learn to say your name, would you learn to stick around?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Helmut Sverenyák, and I am Vice President for Conferences of Tirana.
And my name is Valter Nordh. I am Tirana's Vice President for the Technical Program. And this morning we are chairing this closing plenary of TNC 2014.
We are doing things a little differently this year. Instead of starting with a final keynote speaker and ending with various announcements, we have decided to turn things around. So, instead of ending with a view towards next year's conference, we are going to start with that. By now, you might have heard that TNC 2015 will be hosted by FCT in Porto, Portugal. I would like to invite Mr. João Nuno Ferreira of FCT to come and tell us about it. Welcome, João.
Hello. For those who don't know me, I'm currently member of the board at FCT, the Portuguese Science Funding Agency. I'm in charge of FCCN department or unit that until last September was a separate unit. In the year 2000, we organized TNC in Lisbon, and we thought maybe 15 years was long enough to recover from such demanding task, but also an exciting one. For sure, TNC is now bigger and more relevant than 15 years ago. There are many new challenges being presented to the NRENs today, The exchange of ideas and cooperation are key in dealing with these challenges, and TNC has a central role in this process. So, I would like to invite you to share your best ideas, your worst problems, and your solutions in Porto next year. We will now present a short 4-minute video about this city that, like Dublin, is in a region with Celtic heritage.
Keep you around. 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 I guess I'll keep you around. Keep you around.
Just to say, a small giveaway related with Porto will be offered at the end of this session. So see you next year. Thank you.
Yes, thank you again. And I am looking forward to be there already. So then you will see that João is one of the people who is going to help make TNC 2015 happen, as he is a member of next year's program committee. Thank you in advance to all the program committee members. Okay, I'm sorry. It's empty. Excuse me. So I wonder how this TNC 2015 will compare with this year's event. So the time for some information about this conference and statistics. TNC 2014 was organized by Terena and hosted by HEANet, Ireland's National Education and Research Network. Under the theme Networking with the World, we had 132 speakers, including keynotes, session presentation, lightning talks, and announcements. And we are very pleased that 25 of these are indeed from other parts of the world inside Europe. Thank you for your contribution. And on this slide, you can see the list of keynote speakers. So, statistics about the speakers and participants. Now, it means that the presentation was being heard by 652 participants here in Dublin, and there was a significant number of people who attending this conference by seeing or watching live streams. This is the picture about the streams. We have 60,000 page viewers during this TNC and more than 10,000 sessions. And how you can see, EduRoam is once again proved itself. So going to program committee, the program committee that has made all this happen is here on this slide. And many thanks for me and for the Terena, all of you, for your hard work, especially to this year's chair, Erik Hauser. Erik, please come on the stage for a token of our thanks. Thank you very much, Erik. And I would like also to ask John Boland of HEANet to come and accept this memento of TNC 2014 with our thanks for great conference. Nice conference. Thank you very much. Yes.
There are also a few other people we would like to thank for helping making this year's TNC a success. And we're going to ask the leaders of the various teams to come on stage and their colleagues to stand at the same time to receive our thanks. Representing our host organization, HEANet, and its AV team, Kevin Dermody. We have the technical team with Brian Nisbet. And its events, organizations, and communications one-woman team, Fee Coyle. Next, head of the Nordernet streaming team, Erik Kickingborg. Leaders of Abbey, the local professional conference organizations team, Valerie Abbott and Patricia McColgan. And from UCD, Elaine Montgomery, head of the conference and events management team. We have Kira Acton of IT Services. And last but not least, on behalf of the entire Terina team of staff, both here and in Amsterdam, our conference organizer, Jenji Hovrat. Bear with us for a second, we have a group photo. Okay, so.
Every night I have the same dream, the same dream, the same dream. Every night I have the same dream, it is the same. Every night I have the same.
Okay, thank you very much again to all people who make this conference so nice. And now it's a time for Student Poster Prize. For the past few years, Terina has been encouraging students to participate in the conference by submitting posters in a contest sponsored by Cisco Systems and the Internet Society. This year is no exception. To find out which of the students has won this year's contest, I would like to invite Klaas Vieringa of Cisco. Hello, class. And Karin O'Donoghue of Internet Society to come. You are here already. And say a few words.
Hello. First of all, the Internet Society and Cisco are once again very pleased to have jointly sponsored the Student Poster Contest. We share the basic motivations of doing this, of trying to bring new blood and new ideas into the trainer community, as well as to help develop the next generation of Internet leaders. We actually consider all of our poster submission students here winners because they applied and were accepted to a program that provides them with conference admittance and travel. So what I'd like to do is to have all of the student posters, the 5 student posters, to please stand up. There you are. I see you all now. So I want to thank all of you for participating, and I also want to thank all of the attendees that interacted with them.
Yes, and this is then the moment that you say, yes, you are all winners, but you have to select one. But I don't have to say that right now, because I talked this morning to a couple of the students, and they actually said that themselves, that they consider themselves winners, that they really enjoyed participating here in the conference. Judging by all the people that voted for the posters, by the applause you just gave, I think it is fair to say that that is mutual. But yes, we had to select a winner. We are both very poor organizations, as you know, so we cannot give all the students wonderful prizes. We had to pick only one. But seriously, we had a popular vote, and as a jury, we decided on a winner. From the popular vote, really, 2 things came out. One is all the posters got a lot of votes, and that was very good to see. It means that all of them did a very good job at presenting their work in the lightning talk sessions, in the interactions around their poster booth. So I think that's a big compliment to all of them. But two kind of emerged as having the most votes. So of course we could not ignore the popular vote even if we wanted to. So we had to decide between those two. And in the end, we didn't decide on the technical merits of one versus the other because they were both good. We in the end decided to reward what we think is very important, a very important aspect of being part of this community, and that's the interaction with the community, the going out there, share your ideas, and we thought that one of the poster presenters did a very good job at that, and we decided to reward that. And with that, I hand it back to my colleague Karen, who will announce the winner.
So this year's winner of the Student Poster Contest is Jessica Steinberger from the University of Applied Sciences in Darmstadt for her poster on real-time DDoS defense and a collaborative approach at internet scale. Can you come forward, Jessica? I should say while she's coming up here, this year's prize is a Samsung Galaxy Tab.
Actually, I'm quite nervous right now. So, first of all, I would like to thank all the people who voted for my poster. And I would like to thank Professor Bayer for giving me the chance to work in his working group. I would like to thank Anna Sperotto and Eiko Pras for accepting me as an external PhD and giving me the chance to do my PhD there. And I would like to thank Annette Boots for joining this conference and make flying more comfortable for me.
Thank you, class. Thank you, Karen. Now, we turn our attention to activities that take place away from TNC throughout the years, namely the work that is done in projects, in task forces, in collaboration between individuals and organizations, to share, to develop ideas, to develop technologies, services, and so on, for the ultimate benefit of research and education. For the past couple of years at TNC, Terina has given special recognition to the people who have made outstanding contributions to the work of the research and education networking community. This year, Terina has itself collaborated with the Géant project to open up these community awards to nominations and to enlist the help of a panel of judges to select a winner. It is my pleasure to introduce to you one of those judges who will present the awards, a former Terina president and currently chair of the Géant NREN Policy Committee, Dorte Olsen.
Thank you very much, Valter. The other judges, as it was said we were 4, are shown here on the slide, and I would like very much to thank them also for giving time to consider the nominations. Many worthy people receive nominations. Most of them probably don't know that one of their colleagues in the wider community took the trouble to tell us about their merits and hard work. And of course, we couldn't select them all to receive our award today. So, if you nominated someone and they are not called up here today, please remember to nominate them again next year. The people we selected this time all received more than one nomination. And I say all because in the end, we couldn't decide on just one. We ended up with 3, and for very different reasons. The first is someone we heard about in the opening plenary session, when we shared in a minute's silence to mark his loss, the late Secretary General of Terina, Karel Fitch. But now is not a moment for sadness. Now is a moment for celebration, to celebrate the dedication and the sheer hard work that Karel committed to our community, as well as his many skills. Last year, in 2013, Karel was commended for his outstanding contributions to the internet when he received recognition from the Queen of the Netherlands and was made an officer of the Order of Oranje Nassau. But he never before was really recognized by us in the community, and it's time to do this now. Karel's career started when he did research in pure mathematics, in fact in Banach algebras, but later it went through the Dutch Ministry of Education and Sciences, where he helped create the Dutch NREN and SurfNet, through participation in Cosine, Kern, and ENPD. He contributed to the blossoming of RIPE NCC as an independent organization. He played multiple roles in successive generations of the João project and was an observer in the Dante Board of Directors. He was also really instrumental in setting up internet security activities in Europe and fostering collaboration in research and education networking in many other ways. We heard already on Monday that Karel went even further in his dedication to our community by leaving a legacy in the form of the Fitch Foundation, which will help to stimulate research projects and excellence in the future. For his dedication, hard work, and commitment, the judges all wanted to honor Karel here today as a posthumous recipient of a community award. We want to recognize that it will be difficult to find anyone else who can put so much effort into our community. Karel gave a real example, he is a real role model, and he is sorely missed. As a token of our appreciation, we have chosen to develop a logo for the Fitch Foundation. It's not yet ready, so we can't show it to you, but I will ask Valentino Cavalli, as chair of the board of the Fitch Foundation, to accept our applause.
Well, thank you, Dorte, and thank you on behalf of the Fitch Foundation to the panel that has decided to award this tribute to Karel. Yeah, as Dorte said, I'm looking forward to see the logo. We are now with the foundation discussing how to we are developing a website, and there will be more information available as soon as possible. We will be able to share that with you all soon, hopefully.
And now for the second of our award winners. Stefan Winter. Stefan has been very active in the research and education networking community for quite a number of years. In particular, he has been very dedicated to helping develop the EduRoam service and technology. We already, a couple of years ago, acknowledged the idea behind EduRoam, but since then, EduRoam has developed very much, and this is thanks to a large part to Stefan. With roles in the João project and the Terina Task Force on Mobility and Network Middleware, he has led standardization work, striven for federated solutions, and proposed and developed tools such as FTIX for statistics collection and CAT, the Universal EduRoam Configuration Tool. Around 600 institutions have now signed up to CAT, with almost 500,000 users who are running a secure configuration that required no effort from them. Stefan is an author and co-author of several important internet drafts and RFCs that will lead the way for EduRoam in the future. And recently, he also led a global community effort to understand the impact of heartbleed and to secure the EduRoam radius infrastructure from such attacks. Also, here at the TNC, it's proper to mention that 5 years ago at the TNC in Malaga, Stefan stepped in last minute and helped the Spanish host through hard work to ensure that we could even use EduRoam on the buses to and from the conference venue. At this stage, I would like to point out that these awards are designed to show gratitude and respect to those who have shared their ideas, expertise, and time with our community. But while these are awards for individuals, we also recognize that their contributions are often provided on a voluntary basis and with the goodwill of their organizations. Now, the NRAN that Stefan works for, Estina, represents a very small country. And we want also to recognize that by supporting Stefan in his work, the organization has made a proportionally huge contribution to community collaboration and to the development of EduRoam. So this we also wish to recognize now in presenting the award to you, Stefan. Please come up here. Now maybe I should let you speak before I hand all this over.
I usually talk freely, but sorry, not this time, I'm too nervous. Thank you very much for this very great honor. I'm flattered for having been nominated in the first place, and even more so for actually receiving the award. But even though I am standing here, the name of the award very clearly gives it away that this is not about individuals, it is about the community. For everyone who steps forward with a wild idea, many more are needed to make that idea a reality. In that light, with regards to EduRoam CAT, I would like to thank Tomasz and Maja Wolniewicz, and also the translation team. And with regards to EduRoam at large, there are just too many kind souls who dedicate their time and effort to mention them all. So thanks everybody, basically. Especially in times of austerity, it may be hard to justify spending time and effort on things that are beyond the NRAN's own scope, with no immediate return of investment, as business people would call it. I believe that cutting down on collaborative international work is the wrong way, though. And it is actually much easier for us at Restina in Luxembourg to see than it may be for others. Without international cooperation, we would be a fairly small, but in particular isolated spot in the middle of a very large Europe. Doing something good for the community at large eventually echoes back into something good on the national scale. And I firmly believe that this is not just for us, it is just as true for all the other countries. So let's keep doing great stuff together. Thank you.
And now to our final award for this year. This November will be the 5th anniversary of the first release of another great service to come out of our community. The idea of a file transport service for research and education was first discussed in the Torino Task Force TF Storage. It then developed into the open source file center software, which is now deployed by almost 40 NRENs, institutions and other organizations around the world. There's been a steady growth in the use of file center during the past 5 years, and work is still going on to develop and improve it further, as well as to promote the service. It was Jan Meyer of Uninet who shared the idea for File Center, who chaired the task force discussions, who identified people to collaborate with and build up a community to make it happen, who secured funding from ARNet, ARNES, Belnet, CSC FUNET, HCANet, SURFNet and Uninet, and who led this project to fruition. So our community has produced another great service that's useful and being widely used thanks to Jan's idea and leadership. And for that, we would like to offer you this token of our appreciation. Is Jan here? So please come up.
Yes, I'll have a couple of words. Stefan already mentioned most of what one could say if one receives a community award. I'm very pleased and very happy with receiving this award on behalf of the File Center project. Obviously, the project is much more than just me. We've already heard the sponsors. I don't think Ferreira was actually mentioned, but they recently joined our consortium. File Center is entirely self-financed, and that means that all contributions are really crucially important. In addition, I would like to thank the people who actually make the software, the File Center core team. One of them is here, many of them are not. Chris Richter in Australia, Wendy Mason also in Australia, Mr. Sander Janssen from SURFNet, who's, I presume, watching the live stream at the moment, and Mr. Etienne Meliag from Keynote, and of course, our very own Mr. Guido Aben from ARNet. And with that, I think I said what I wanted to say. Yes.
There will be a second here with a couple of photos. Thank you very much, Dorte. Thank you everyone for their hard work, and looking forward to next year's nominations for TNC 2015. Please keep on sharing ideas. Well. Everyone, please keep sharing your ideas and expertise. It is in the collaboration that we can build new ideas and create new innovation. Please look out for next year's nominations as well to encourage the spirit of innovation and collaboration.
Thank you. And now the time is come to introduce the final keynote speaker of this conference. Dr. Martyn Dade-Robertson from Newcastle University is a lecturer on architecture with a background in information architecture. He will tell us about relationship between them and show how data visualization can make beautiful art depicting the very things we have been talking about during the conference. His presentation will end with an audiovisual performance that was made in collaboration with Domenico Vicinanza of Dante, and there will be the chance to ask questions after that. Martyn, please, welcome.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you again to the conference organizers for what I think is probably the best organized conference I've ever been to. I think it's been an extraordinary well-run event, and I'm really glad that the hands of my university network and others are in such safe hands with this crowd. That said, I want to start with an apology. The apology is that I realized with horror this morning that my belt somehow had gotten mislaid on the aircraft on the way over, and I put on a pair of trousers I haven't put on for a while, and the good news is that I seem to have lost weight. The bad news is that they could fall down at any moment. So if I start to hide behind the lectern a lot, you'll know why. These gentlemen did a rather good job of introducing me, but just to say again that I'm an architect, or at least used to be an architect of the old sort, so the kind that designed buildings, but more recently have become at least a commentator on an architecture of a new sort, and that architecture is information architecture. And there's a good reason for that. I trained throughout the 1990s, the end of the 1990s, at a time when the conversation in architecture, as in the rest of the world, was about dematerialization. It was about a world in which many of the functions provided by our built environment were moving into other sorts of environments. And as an architecture student, that caused me some concern. It caused me some concern because I wondered whether there would be a job for me at the end of my training, and it's a long training, 7 years, to realize that people don't need buildings anymore. But also it seemed to be a time of new opportunities, opportunities for a different sort of architecture. And so my research and my interest have been in trying to understand what that sort of architecture is about. To give you a little more idea about the cultural context of the time, this was a book that came out in 1991 called Cyberspace First Steps. It was the first to gather a group of architects to discuss the future of what we then called cyberspace. And cyberspace as a term has become rather passé now. I think we're so used to this networked environment that we don't need this catch-all term. But there was this idea that in this dematerialized world, there'd be a need for a new sort of profession, a kind of information architect who would transcend the limitations of the physical world and the material world and create structures that could live free of that, and that ultimately we would inhabit this new world completely. It wasn't just in architecture that these ideas were discussed either. For those of you who are into science fiction, and I'm sure there are one or two people in here who are, will recognize the cyberpunk literature that started really in the 1980s and reached its fruition in the 1990s. This is a quote from Snow Crash. I won't read it, but it describes the metaverse. But what's interesting about these descriptions is that in trying to articulate this new networked world, this world that existed between our physical world and our digital information, writers and indeed filmmakers often resorted to using architectural metaphors in their explanation. In this case, the World Wide Web, or the combination of the World Wide Web and the internet, looks rather like Las Vegas or New York. One of the very first descriptions or uses of the term cyberspace in William Gibson's Neuromancer, he describes it in this rather conflicted way, and I just want to draw your attention to the bottom line there. He imagined it a place of unthinkable complexity, lines of light ranged in the non-space of the mind, clusters and constellations of data. Oh, I can see it down here, this is great. Like city lights receding. Mind you, I can also see myself down here as well, which is less than great. I'll keep looking up to that. So, like city lights receding, and here we get a conflict, this idea that our collective imaginations and technology are creating this place of unthinkable complexity, like a world brain. But in describing it, ultimately he falls back onto the metaphor of the city, this idea that the world, the web, or cyberspace as he saw it, was rather like a city. It was described rather like a city, and this has fascinated me. Another influence for me was this place. So one or two people might recognize this. This is the University Library in Cambridge. I had the good fortune of living close by to this library, working in this library for most of the time I was working on my PhD. Cambridge University Library is interesting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it is a copyright library, so in the UK context, that means that it, by law, receives any book or indeed magazine or publication that is printed in the UK. So they have this model of continual accumulation. They constantly amassing more and more material. But is also, unusually for a copyright library, an open access library. Now, not everything is open access. I believe that there was a rumor actually that, for example, the pornography you had to get special permission for, and it was actually held in the tower. I don't know whether that's true or not. But that the books that were considered of academic value to the university were put on open access shelves. That makes this not only a vast building, but a vast building for the visitor, because as the visitor, you're often the one who has to go to retrieve the book that you're interested in doing. And I was working in the library one day, and I'd like to say this was one day, but actually this happened 3 or 4 times throughout my PhD career, but I'm combining the story. And I lost my wallet. Which is a disastrous thing to do anyway, but in this context was extra disastrous because I'd been in the library all day and couldn't remember where I'd last had it. Now, to give you some idea, during the course of the day, I'd explored a building that had 6 floors, wings that are described as south wing, southwest wing, east wing, and so on. And I'd visited at least 12 or 13 locations during my journey as I traced references and then gone to find the next set of texts that those references referred to. But I had something to help me. I had my notebook. I should say, by the way, this isn't actually my notebook. This is Leonardo da Vinci's notebook. But mine looks very like this. You'll just have to take my word for that. So using the index, and the notes that I'd taken during the course of the day to the locations of the books, I could track my path back through the library with real precision, and I could essentially retrace my steps. So that's what I did. So I went back through the library and retraced my steps. So I learned a few things during that exercise, and I say this is not an exercise that I did only once. It took me 30 minutes. So just to go back through the library, to go through the different locations back and forth that I'd done during that day was 30 minutes of time. That's not stopping and dwelling at the books. That's just going to see if my wallet is there. Along the way, when you're not so focused on your studies, you also notice other things. When you have a library that is so vast and has an open access system, there needs to be ways in which collections or personal collections can be maintained. One of the ways that you do this is through little slips of paper. So what you do is when you've gone for your day's work, you get 5 or 6 books together, you put them on a little stack, you put slips of paper on the top with your name and the date on. And that means that you can preserve your bit of the library for about 5 days before they're then returned to the shelf. And these little stacks are all over the place. And if you were like me, you were only supposed to have 6 books out at a time. But I worked out that if I had multiple stashes of these all around the librarians never worked out that I was doing more than 1 stack, so I could have these things. So a little part of the library was organized by me each time I went round, so these little stacks were available everywhere. But the other thing that they did is to give you an insight into what other people were researching. So one of the things you could do if you had a little bit of downtime was actually go and see what these little stacks represented, these little reorganizations of the libraries that for that moment represented someone else's research. But ultimately, the force of the library was trying to pull these things back into position all the time. So ultimately, the librarian would find you out, would come and pick up a stack of books that had been left there for too long, and they would be redistributed throughout the library, back into their appropriate locations. And as I say, these happen everywhere. So these little stacks, these little reorganizations occur throughout the library. And as a reader, you began to get used to actually reading these organizations in the same way that you read the others. The other thing that you notice is what is described as stack overflow. Now, that might mean something different to the people in here than it does to me. And I'm assuming that the word actually originates from this sort of system. But what happens is that because the library is this model of continual accumulation, the shelves often can't hold the number of books, particularly in areas that are growing very rapidly. So fields, for example, at the university library, like management studies, were growing much more rapidly than the librarians were able to reorganize the shelves to be able to archive old books and so on. So this meant that there was literally no shelf room. So when this stack overflow happens, what you get is that any available surface in the library becomes a place for the organization of books. So what you see here, these are actually tables that were designed really for studying on, are now stacked 3 deep with books, and in fact the windows, you can see up at the top, you can see the window shelves. What am I talking about? I'm supposed to be an architect. Window shelves. Window sills. The window sills. Okay, it's been a little while since I've been in that world. The window sills are actually covered in books. They're ordered perfectly against their categorization, but you find this continual accumulation breaking out, and new kind of associations occurring in the text. So, I didn't find my wallet. In fact, I got back to reception and it turned out that the wallet was there. Such is the way of things. But it's taken me half an hour. Someone else had probably picked it up in the meantime. But I learned a couple of things. One thing is to keep my wallet on the chain. Now, this is the moment where I pull out my wallet and reveal to you that after 10 years, I still have my wallet on the chain. Until this morning, I realized I'd forgotten the chain and left it at home. There's a picture emerging here of the absent-minded academic that I'm trying to fulfill. But most of the time I keep my wallet on the chain nowadays. But also that while working in the library, I was part of a rich physical as well as intellectual experience. That my day was in some ways as much physical work as it was intellectual work in that context. Now, we tend to think in a network world that this sort of reality is something that we want to get away from. Why should I not have that knowledge on my fingertips? Why should I not have those structures of information there bespoke to me, delivered in the way that I know? But I think we can learn from these things as well. The time it took me to go back through the library, I've said here, was an embodiment of my semantic trails. So literally, the paths that I walked were the paths that I took between ideas. Now, the fact that the library wasn't serving me well, in the sense that it didn't gather together the things that were relevant to me, made me work all the harder to bring those things together. And that was what I was attempting to do, just by bringing these little assemblies. That I was also, in an indirect way, part of a collaborative experience. It doesn't mean that I was talking to other researchers in the library. You don't do that in a library. You stay quiet, usually, other than in the tea room. But that I was able to sense the research that was going on around me through these little stacks of books that were being left there, through these tiny reconfigurations of text. And finally, that the library was a kind of informal fuzzy visualization. What it was doing in this relationship between the limitations of the infrastructure and areas where knowledge was growing more quickly than the infrastructure was able to handle it, I was getting a sense of where it was that the library was almost literally bursting at the seams, where there was more information than it was able to keep there. So I think there's something interesting in that. And that set my research off in different directions, and this leads me to the artworks I'm going to talk about. Started off with a very, I think a very, well, I know now, a rather naive question, which was essentially, well, I'm an architect, and I'm interested in these digital networks, whether it be the internet or the web that works on top of the internet, or the way that information works. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What is its physicality? So, as a PhD student, I started without any kind of computer science background, trying to get to grips with tools that would enable me to understand this problem a little better. I have to say at this point, and it's strange that I'm invited to present this. This is my first keynote, I think, ever, and I'm invited to present this, which is essentially a failed research experiment. Because what I discovered was that as I started to understand even something as what I thought was relatively simple as hypertext on a website, what I was getting were images and representations that were far more complex than I was able to understand and process. One of the keynote speakers on the first day described these in relation to biological visualization, where you have things like reactomes and the proteome, and you have these linked graph representations. He described them with hairballs, and that's essentially what you get. You get these massive lines and nodes that are clustered together and that group in all kinds of often quite visually appealing ways, but ways that are not necessarily very clear. Those ideas and the way I thought about them led to a book. So in that sense, there was a research outcome from it. But what became very clear to me, particularly in trying to put papers on this into the data visualization community, was that this sort of data visualization was not terribly well respected and actually wasn't terribly useful to do the sorts of things that I wanted to do. However, they were really pretty. So I thought, well, they're really pretty, so maybe we can do something else with them. So in 2010, as I started, as I was by that time an academic at Newcastle, I started trying to learn a little bit more about how to program a computer and how to produce these sorts of visualizations by taking this idea on forward. So it works very simply. So the visualizations I'm going to show you are very straightforward to anyone who knows data visualization, but I can tell you how they work. So firstly, we use a web crawler. The web crawler goes and returns information from a given URL. It will return the elements of a website. So that could be code assets, it might be images, or text within the page. And the hyperlinks between them, it returns as link information, and I get a great huge spreadsheet with a list of the URLs and all the pages that relate to those URLs. I then put those through a force-directed graph. And what the force-directed graph does is to map, firstly, the nodes, the individual points, their connections. The nodes then gravitate towards one another that are most well linked. Those that are not linked will try and force apart. So it's a kind of physics simulation. And then once I've done that, I end up with a network graph that I then put through various phases of post-production. I get things that look a little bit like this. So what I did first of all was to see if this work might be accepted as artwork. I thought, well, could I sell these to people? Would people accept them, stick them on their walls? I thought I would, but I'm also quite geeky, so I wanted to see whether anybody else would. So I submitted some of the work to a gallery, a local gallery in Newcastle called the Biscuit Factory. And actually, to my great surprise, they said yes, and mounted an exhibition of these works. And I initially exhibited, I think it was 6 works in the end. There were, no, 7 works. There were 3 that I called the Icons Triptych that dealt with Google, Microsoft, and Apple, and they were lined up in a row. The one that you see there is the Apple website in the middle. And also I took local landmarks to the northeast, so places like Lindisfarne and Bamburgh Castle. The people would recognize from the usual representations of them, but I took their websites and I made these artworks from them. And we mounted the exhibition. I sold a couple during the exhibition of these standard pieces and got 4 or 5 more commissions. Mostly, I should say, from companies who wanted this artwork for the walls of their receptions or whatever. I got approached by consultants who took me on as an art consultant, and I got a number of art consultants who took me on and got me commissions that way as well. So the one that you see here is actually one I did for Durham Net Park, which is a local organization. It brings together different companies in the region and has a physical kind of hub base where they serve new companies. What I found really interesting was the people's responses to these sorts of visualizations. So what I got was that people were that people were responding to them not as data visualizations in the analytical sense, but were responding from them as a way of kind of materializing their presence. So for the companies that have commissioned my work, they tend to be companies that have a huge amount of their infrastructure, their resources online. They may have very humble offices or very anonymous sort of physical representations of themselves, but really their work is in this incredible complexity of infrastructure that they put together. So I get approached by internet ISPs and those sorts of people who want that representation, who want a moment where they might celebrate their presence. If we think about it like a 19th century industrialist having paintings on their wall of their factories and perhaps the villages that they funded to be built, for technology companies this seems to occupy a similar space. Similarly, and you saw an image at the exhibition, people are fascinated, the artworks tend to contain the URLs as well. People are fascinated in looking at some of these things as cultural objects. If you look at the Google image, for example, what you find in there are lots of internal references to everything from popular culture right the way through to people buying different technology protocols and all kinds of things that are really hidden within these maps. So people are responding to them on an emotional level, even if they are not necessarily of the same intellectual value that I'd set out to achieve at the beginning. So in 2013, the data portraits was turned into a university service, so we now offer it as a service in the university. And that means that the university takes a cut and that part of the money then pays for my research if we do any work there. And as a result of that, it was also featured hugely. So the university did a press release and it was featured on the BBC website on Wired, and I guess I'm here giving the keynote because of the publicity that it garnered in the last year and increased the number of visitors to my website and so on. So the idea is that this might now, even if it couldn't be a research outcome itself, might support other research outcomes. And so I just wanted to talk briefly about what those outcomes have been. I don't have time to give an academic presentation on data visualization today, but I have made it a mission in the past 3 years to start looking at ways in which I can build meaningful and interesting visualizations, but also taking the idea of data portraits, visualizations that are not necessarily about pure analytics in terms of telling me exactly how what the network looks like or how it is operating, but that enables people to engage with data in a different way and allows insights that might actually come more from them than from the visualizations itself. We're funded through an EPSRC project called Patina that looks at the future of research spaces, and I took work packages that it looked specifically at data visualization. We worked on a number of prototypes, and I'm just going to show you one that we describe as monadic visualization. I'd love to take credit for this, but Martyn Dade, who is now an associate professor in Potsdam, did the design work for this visualization. Rob Kummer has been, as a sociologist, he's been helping in developing the theory and writing the papers, and we've just had a paper published at Chi this year on this. But there's the idea of taking the same sort of network information that I was dealing with in data portraits, but asking what happens when you look between the network links? What happens when you treat the network links as aggregates and you see every point within the network as only in relation to other points? And this idea comes from Gabriel Tarde, who's a sociologist writing in the 19th century. And the idea is developed further in things like actor network theory, for those of you who are interested in it. We took as our case study a relatively clean and easy to use data set. In this case, this is a book called Beautiful Trouble. And the way the book is organized is that the book is about essentially it's a creative toolkit for activists, so people who want to protest about something, who want to draw attention to something. It gives them a series of ideas about how to do that in creative and interesting ways that will garner publicity and so on. And on the right-hand side there, what they have are articles, and each article then is related to other articles in a hyperlinked way. So although they publish a book, they also have a website where this data was very easy to access. So on the left-hand side, you see the article. On the right, here you see these other things that are linked to, categorized as tactics, theories, case studies, and so on. So it gave us a really nice contained data set that we could use, and we could build something quite quickly. And then what Martyn did was to work out an algorithm that didn't just simply look at the relationships between the different themes in that network, but also began to measure different distances between the different nodes. So effectively counting the distance from every point to every other point. Interestingly, this is a system that we also use in architectural design. So there's a sort of theories called space syntax, which deal with spaces as nodes and start to try to understand the network and the relationship of a network, for example, in the city, as a series of spaces that are connected or disconnected together. And this is done to analyze how cities grow and how buildings operate and function in different ways. And then using this idea, he and this is Rob, by the way. So Martyn built that in about 2 months from beginning to end, and actually has something that works really robust now. What I should have done is given you the URL, by the way, but you should be able to access that site now. So it's online. We've had thousands and thousands of responses to our comment section on there. If you just Google "Beautiful Trouble," you go to their website and you can go directly to the visualization, and it would be great to play with it and to get feedback. We've published on it now, but the more information we have, the better we can do. So this gives us a slight glimpse into what we're trying to develop in terms of new visualization interfaces that, are, as I say, are not necessarily there purely for analytics, but are there to give an engaging and physical representation of these complex structures that enable people to gain insight through free exploration, really, of those information spaces. So I have the danger of trying to conclude that work, and I'd love to talk in more detail about some of the other representations, but given that I have you all in the room, I wanted to perhaps place some ideas or project ideas on the table, or at least to describe, as a researcher, the sorts of system and sorts of infrastructure that I want to see in the future. It is, I think, perhaps too easy to look at experiences like I had in the Cambridge University Library and romanticize those immersive experiences of research, when those experiences can only be had by a very few people, and where that idea of the dissemination and organization of knowledge is limited in lots of ways. But at the same time, as researchers, I think we're feeling increasingly atomized or separated from, it's separated into, our work and our lives are separated into different packages, whether that be teaching or research, or whether that be through the many different sorts of systems that we use whilst doing research, whether it be bibliographic work or using search engines or using different sorts of journal and so on. To give you an example of this now, one of the main thrusts of my university strategy is to make sure that teaching and research have parity of esteem, but more than that they are considered to be equal and connected. But often the systems that we have are not equal and connected. So for teaching, I tend to share my files through something like Blackboard, but for my research, I'm increasingly relying on services like Dropbox to be able to share files. And yet much of my teaching involves sharing, often quite early stages, my research with my students. So I've started to try and leave Blackboard behind, which gives me all kinds of opportunities, and start increasingly to use Blackboard, which allows me simply to share a link with my students immediately, and in a much more dynamic and responsive way than the sort of systems that I'm currently using elsewhere. And I want to see those ideas, the sorts of infrastructure that I use for research and for teaching, to be much more closely linked, and to find environments that try and connect these things together. Now, I understand that that is a very, very hard task to do, but it's something that, as a researcher, we really want to, as a researcher, I would love to see. I also show this image. So this is, we're getting quite a lot of publicity for this now as well. In fact, in the last day or so, the local BBC website has featured this work. This image here is from a series called Digital Ethereal. It's by a PhD student of mine, Lewis Hernan. What it shows is the relative Wi-Fi strength, in this case over the threshold into the building, the entrance to my building. So what you see here, this is a long exposure photography. What's happening is that Lewis is carrying a device. In fact, you can download it. This is a mobile app now for Android, but this place it was a device that he made with LEDs that glow different colors depending on the strength of a particular wireless signal. And then what he does is sort of wave it around in space and walk through. And then the hotter the color, the higher the signal strength. And what you get are these incredible patterns that are derived both from his choreography, his movement through the space, but also this often fluctuating and quite dynamic field of wirelessness that he's creating. And he used that both as a real representation, but also as a metaphor for what I call the invisible university. The fact that there was a time, and it is still the case, that our campuses somewhat shape our intellectual endeavors. They shape the way in which we think of subjects because they organize people in particular patterns. They concentrate resources and certain types of facility in certain ways. But that equally now our infrastructure has a role to play. But that infrastructure is invisible, and ways of making it visible, ways of making it apparent, are both are ways of celebrating it, but also problematizing it, also showing where there are weaknesses and where there are problems. So finding these material representations, whether they be through visualization or through other means, I think is also really important. And this idea of trying to uncover what these invisible campuses look like, I think should be a priority. So talking of which, so I'd like to conclude by showing off a piece of work now. So we got called, I have to say, a little last minute. So myself and Domenico Vicinenza, Domenico is amongst other things, is a music composer. And the organizers of the conference thought, well, wouldn't it be great if you could have an ordification for your data portraits? Why don't you guys do a piece of artwork together? So that seemed like a good idea, but doing a piece of artwork in a couple of weeks is a challenge. But what we eventually did is that I sent Domenico some data, some web mapping data that I'd developed. From that, Domenico wrote a score that is derived from the data and then recorded the piece. And then literally yesterday, I stuck a bunch of my data portraits together with the piece, and the music piece, in the hope that it would make some sense. So, as a world premiere, we're going to show this today. I hope you'll enjoy it. We can run the video. Thank you. And I can take questions. And also, I'm not going to let him get away. If you want to ask Dominique or anything, he's sitting here, so I can forward them to him.
Well, thank you very much for this. Looks fantastic. As it happens in EduRoam, we are sitting on a huge database, which I think might deserve some visualization, because we receive information in real time. It does from which country do researchers go to which other countries to do something. So basically we have a mobility profile of how Europe and some other countries physically exchange their researchers. And I guess you could visualize which countries exchange researchers most vividly. Where does research go together? Where are the clusters? As it happens, we are not very good at data visualization, so we just have a rather dull map, so you can click on it and get an arrow. And I wonder if this could be the source of one of those projects you've been talking about.
Wow, that would be very cool. Yeah, I mean, actually, this is an example of the invisible university, right? This is how things are happening. These physical relationships that are now being built up because we have these networks that are partly about people visiting places, but also, out of interest, what would be the privacy implications of using that kind of data, though?
Yeah, the data can be made coarse-grained enough to not have any privacy invasions, so we can just get it on a country level. So you don't see where exactly did the guy come from, you don't see the university, you just see somebody from Luxembourg went to Latvia. Right.
No, I mean, I suspect we've got a room full of really interesting data sets in this relationship, and I think there's probably a really good kind of combined project that looks at this idea of trying to map, trying to visualize in this kind of cartography, this new cartography of knowledge that we can create with this combined data. That would be extraordinary, yeah.
Thank you for a fascinating talk. It strikes me at the moment that you're operating in a manner somewhat analogous to a landscape photographer that's showing us the sort of accidental beauties in the information structures we're building for far more brutal and functional reasons. Do you see a next stage in your work being informed more by your architectural background and try and impose some beautiful structures on what we then set out to build?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought like that so far. In terms of the next steps for us, I mean, there are some real challenges. We've been using so far firstly very clean data and very limited data. We're not in anywhere near the kind of amounts of data that we would need to be able to handle in order to produce these truly kind of awesome visualizations of some of these structures. We've been choosing very easy targets up until now. I don't know that there is a rather I could have quite a prolonged conversation with what the role of visualization is in this context, actually, because the visualizations often tell you much more about the process of visualizing than they do about the data. And that's what we found with data portraits. It tells you much more about the physics simulation that you use to try and map in that way than it really does tell you about the truth behind the connections between those different things. And of course, the moment that you consider something to be a network, you don't understand it qualitatively. That a node and a link between a node isn't necessarily the same for a system, that those nodes have a qualitative aspect to them as well. it gets very complicated, and so you get into the territory where the visualization kind of gives you what you want, actually. You know, in the realm of a landscape photographer, what you're doing is you're choosing some very choice bits to photograph, and then you're choosing them in very, very particular ways. And data portraits, most of the work goes into post-production. Most of it is in Photoshop, where I add in the blurs and the layers and so on. So yes, I think that there are some interesting things that could be done. My research has looked at navigational networks a little bit and the relation between those and things like planar mapping, and there was work done in the 90s about cognitive mapping and how people explore certain networked representations. But I do think the architectural analogy breaks down quite quickly when you go down that route. I think we're dealing with things that are not like architecture at all. They're like something completely different, and that's the fascination, I suppose. But I would have to think about that one, I think, and there's an interesting thoughts there.
Thank you, very interesting talk. A couple of questions came to mind. One is, have you thought about how you deal with the dynamics of these web structures? You know, these pages change over time, the links change. That was one question. And the other one, is there any thought about weighting the links somehow in terms of how much they're used as people work their way through these sites? No and yes. So we've gone for very easy targets. So the project that I showed you last, which is probably, from my research group's terms, the most substantial piece of data visualization that we've done, was done in 3 months with relatively little financial support. It was the end of the project, and it was really the last thing that we did. So we didn't look at anything more complicated than that, and so we chose a website that was stable, because we knew that it was content that wasn't being added to, because it was essentially a representation of a book that was now in print and was staying static. There has been some discussion since then, and some of the comments that we've had back from the website, the people who've used the website have discussed other options for weighting the data and doing other things to it. And I think there are very easily actually things that we could add on there that would begin to start changing your view, and allowing you to follow other people's trails and to see the proximity of things in a different way. So yes, I think I think if we were carrying on with the project, if we had a bit more funding, we would certainly be doing that sort of thing next. Yeah, absolutely. Might be it. I think so. Thank you very much.
Any more questions? Well, thank you very much, Martyn.
Thank you very much.
So we're coming to the end of the TNC 2014. We hope you have all enjoyed this as much as I have. There is a brief reminder that for those registered to the General Assembly and for the workshops in the afternoon, there will be lunch in the same place as yesterday. And a few final words from Helmut.
Thank you. At the end of this conference, I would like again to thank all of them who made this event successful. It means national hosting organization, all of organizers, technical and supporting teams, program committee, speakers, of course the sponsors, and also all of you participants. Thank you very much, and see you next year in Porto, and please don't forget to take your gift going outside. Thank you very much, and safe trip home.
We can lock it all down, or we can set it all free. But you don't have to tell me, you don't have to tell me, you don't have to tell me.